If you're struggling at the moment with your life or with your feelings, this episode is for you. For 30 years, I've been winning the war in my head against thoughts of depression, against anxiety, even against sometimes suicidal tendencies. I've been fighting a battle constantly to be able to ensure that I'm thinking the most useful way possible. And in this episode, we're going to cut any of the bullshit and talk about what it really means to be struggling with our mental health in this day and age. I want to share with you a little bit about my story. I want to talk to you about the kinds of challenges we face in the modern world that are tougher than ever, and offer you guidance as to what are some of the things that can help you in such a world, some of the insights, some of the ideas, even some of the strategies. So by the end of this episode, I'm hoping that I'm helping you to be able to tackle your own monsters, your own dragons, your own challenges in the best way possible. If you're ready, let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another Changing Minds episode. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to do something we've never done before. So a lot of times I've got a structure in my head, I even have some notes here, and I know I'm going to go down, and first I'll give you the definitions. Here's what depression is, here's what anxiety is. And maybe in a future episode I will get into that. But I've decided to really scrap this and not look through a lot of this stuff, because what I want to do is I want to talk to you, just me to you. And I want this to be dedicated to any of you out there that are struggling. Any of you out there that are struggling with your emotions, you're struggling with where you are in life. Maybe you've had a big change in your life. Maybe you've finally retired and now all of a sudden you don't know who you are, what to do with yourself. A lot of times sports athletes, like top professional athletes, when they retire, all of a sudden their identity, which has been completely meshed with their career, they now, as they leave or retire, they don't know how to think about themselves. They don't know how to understand themselves anymore. Their identity is stretched. Maybe you're just overcoming a breakup. Maybe you're struggling as a result of just having broken up with someone. Maybe you're just getting divorced or separated. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you're struggling through the toughest, darkest times ever. Maybe you're struggling with your health. There's an infinite array of possibilities. Or maybe you just feel shit. Maybe you're just struggling with your own mood. You feel down, you feel anxious, you feel worried. You might be feeling what they call languishing, which is not like severely depressed, but just feel like listless and low of energy and who cares and who gives a shit and that kind of thing. And regardless of what you're feeling, what I want to do is talk to you, share with you a little bit about how I can relate to that, how I have related to that, how I still do relate to that. Because for me, as someone who's struggled in his life with his mental health, you need to be vigilant. You need to keep battling. And that's what I want to sort of offer you, are some of the tools and some of the ideas that can help you to be able to cope with it and to deal with it. First of all, why do we feel the way we feel? Sometimes the first thing that comes to mind is I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. And I know that from being a therapist, working with lots of people, that one of the worst parts of going to therapy is the feeling that something's wrong with me. I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And that's something that's very easy to fall into that trap. But the reality is that most people struggle in their own way. Whenever you're at the dark of night at 3:30, 4 o'clock a.m. in the middle of the night, oftentimes that's when we face our demons. And that's when we start to think about the darkest thoughts, the hardest thoughts, the most impactful challenges on our life. And what we need to recognize is that more often than not, people are struggling even if they're not saying it. And so we live in a world that, despite the fact that it's becoming more acceptable to, let's say, go to therapy or to acknowledge that you've got mental health problems, it still feels like a weakness. And as a result of that, people don't like to admit it and accept it. Well, if you're struggling with it and you feel that you're not really sharing with someone else, it becomes even harder for you to deal with. And that's why they say, share whatever you're going through, share the challenges, share the struggles that you're finding yourself facing. But what's really important to recognize is that as you're dealing with whatever negative thoughts, negative feelings, negative emotions that you're going through, it's really critical for you to understand that you're not alone. That what you're experiencing does not make you weird or does not make you strange. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. And in fact, if you're struggling, that makes you more normal than you can possibly imagine. The truth of the matter is that so many people struggle with their own mind. And even if you've, let's say on the outside, been given everything that you should want in life, even if your family is very supportive, even if you have all that you need, even if you're succeeding from a wealth perspective and everything is good, even if you should be feeling great, you still could be fighting demons inside. You still could be feeling awful. And I can relate in the sense that when I grew up, when I was 14 years old, I was struggling massively with depression. I was quite lonely. I didn't have many friends at the time. I wasn't very good socially. I wasn't very confident. I had very low self esteem. And every day I went to school, I hated it. I hated being around people. I hated getting bullied. I hated the way I felt about myself. And I struggled a lot with my mental health to the point that I became suicidal for a while. And every day I would go home from school and I would think to myself, is this the day? And I would write suicide notes. And the suicide notes would be to my parents, who, I've always gotten on really well with. But I would write suicide notes to them. And the suicide notes would tell them how I, don't think I could survive anymore. And one of the moments that changed everything for me was that there was a moment I felt particularly down. It was the same week, I suppose, that I remember going to school. It was a Tuesday afternoon. And I remember walking home during lunch from school and walking across the street, walking across the road, and a big truck was coming towards me. And it was just about before I could step onto the road. So I was just about to walk on front of the road and I saw the truck and I stepped in front of the truck. And this was on the same street as my school. And the truck sort of started beeping the horn and started skidding to a stop. And just at the very last second, I stepped out of the way. And I remember running home at that stage, and whoever saw me or whatever, other students that saw me would have been like, oh, what went on there? But I remember crying my eyes out at the time. And I remember getting home and just thinking to myself, I was so close there. And I used to think to myself, if only I had the courage to be able to do it, to end it all, not realizing that wasn't courageous. And that week in particular, I struggled a lot. Later on that week, I sat down and wrote a suicide note, and it was addressed to my parents. And as I wrote that suicide note, I started to tell them how much I loved them, not to blame themselves, how tough life was and how I couldn't cope with it and I just wasn't going to be able to deal with it. And something happened while I was writing it. As I was writing that letter to my parents, at some point, all of a sudden, it was almost like my hand was taken over by something else. Because I remember saying something along the lines of, I've got to die, my life is worthless. I have to say goodbye. And then my hand said, do you? And I remember then something along the lines of, I started an argument with myself on the page. So here I am writing my suicide note, and all of a sudden it's like I'm writing a to and from. I'm going, here's why I need to die, here's why I need to stay alive. And I start to focus on everything that I'm writing down. It's scribbling at this stage. Now tears are streaming down my eyes, and I start to recognize that as I'm writing it, I realize that every single word that I'm writing down is some part of me that comes from somewhere that's telling me that I need to stay alive. And I'm stacking the evidence on the other side. You're useless. You don't have any friends. You're a reject. There's a reason why no one likes you. You're never going to be able to change. And it's just, well, but maybe. The other voice was just like, but maybe things can change. Maybe you can get better. Maybe your whole life can turn around. You never know. Maybe you had the opportunity to be able to do something. Maybe you can take responsibility for your life. And as I went to and fro, as I started to find myself battling with this, with almost a verbally violent argument with myself, I began to think about my parents. And I thought about the feeling that my parents would have if I took my own life. I remember thinking of my father and my mother, who I'm very, very close to, and thinking about their experience and their pain in seeing me die and seeing me dead and knowing that they didn't do anything to help. And I remember at that moment feeling this overwhelming desire that I had to make a change, that I had to live. And I had to live, if not for me, then for them. And it was that decision at that moment that transformed everything for me, because it wasn't that depression went away. I still struggled every single day. I still struggled with my self-esteem. I still felt terrible about myself. I still felt terrible about my future. But there was this belief inside me, a determination that said, you've got to push through this. You've got to get through this. And I remember around that time, I also saw the movie Rocky for the first time. I watched it on a small black and white screen. And I remember being transfixed with it, seeing this like bum who was a loser, who was fighting the champion of the world and he had no chance. And he said, all I want to do is go the distance with Creed. That's what he said. He said, that's all I want to do. I want to go the distance with the world champion. If I can do that, that makes it all worthwhile. I remember him battling through the rounds, and in the second last round, him being knocked down, and then he picks himself back up. And in that moment, I realized that was a metaphor for my life. No matter how hard life got, you got to pick yourself back up, you got to dust yourself off, and you got to keep moving forward. And to me, that is the thing that saved my life. It was that moment where I realized that I had to live. And every single time I was going to get knocked down, I had to dust myself off, pick myself back up, and move forward. Because life it's suffering, it's tough, it's hard. And just when things are going well, you can have a turning point and things go badly again. And when you deal with life like this, you not only are dealing with the external challenges of the world, you also got to deal with your own mood, your own mind. You're also going to tackle that because your brain is not always going to be supportive of you. And it's well and good for people out there in the field of self-help or psychology, positive psychology, or different areas to turn around and say, all you need to do is this, just do a gratitude journal. And gratitude journaling is excellent, and it's a wonderful tool, and I highly recommend it. But this notion that all you got to do is this, and then you'll be fine, most of that advice is given by people that don't know what it's like to struggle. I don't know what it's like to be vigilant against your mental health. I'm in my mid-40s at the moment, and I have to be constantly vigilant because the darkness is anytime around the corner. I find myself every now and then struggling with the feelings. But I've been lucky enough to be able to learn how to deal with them. And the first lesson that I learned was to realize things like depression. Depression's a liar. Whenever you feel a certain way, it's not that you think negatively, it's that you believe negatively. And you start to see the world in that way. It's called affective realism. We start to see the world in a certain way that doesn't reflect what's actually going on. And whenever we feel like we're languishing, which is not fully depressed, but we feel like, what's the point? Once again, we're seeing reality through that lens. Whenever we're anxious, we're hyper vigilant and noticing all of the possible things that can go wrong. We're seeing the world through that lens. And what we need to realize is these are real challenges. This is real brain chemistry going on. But once you understand what's going on, once you understand that there's nothing wrong with you, even if you're struggling with a condition and you need medication, even if you need to go and you need to check yourself in somewhere, even in those situations, there's nothing wrong with you. You're struggling and something's not operating in a certain way, but that doesn't mean that something's inherently wrong with who you are. Because who you are is not what you're capable of today. It's everything you can possibly become at your best. And part of life is about dealing with the adversity and dealing with the challenges that we face so we can continue to grow and we continue to get better and we continue to elevate our own performance. That's what life is. It's struggle after struggle. And the aim is that we have to fight greater and greater demons and greater dragons. And the more that you realize that this is what's in store, the more that it transforms your ability to deal with these adversities. Because instead of you allowing them to knock you down and go, oh, why me? Or, oh, I can't do anything. Instead of falling into the victim mindset or the villain mindset where we beat ourselves up and we think we're the cause of our problems, or the victim mindset where we say the reason for the problems is life isn't fair. Well, guess what? Life isn't fair. Life is pretty shitty. But right now, as we're talking, as you're listening to me talk, there's lots of people that have it worse than both of us. There's lots of people that have it worse than you. Lots of people that are dealing with horrific experiences right now in the world. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be feeling bad about whatever you're feeling bad, or you should feel bad about the fact that you're feeling bad. It's about recognizing that life inherently is tough. And as a result of that, in order for us to deal with it, we need to dig deep and we need to become stronger and tougher. And that doesn't mean we need to deny our feelings. We need to embrace the strength that comes with being vulnerable and accepting help and accepting the fact that things aren't exactly the way we want them to be. Some of the strongest people in the world physically struggle with their mental health. And I know from experience that when you're the kind of person that is struggling with your mental health, you need all the tools you can get, because that's the ultimate challenge you'll face. And whereas we can sort of conquer any obstacle, people can, they've demonstrated incredible acts of heroism in the world today. The real act of being a hero when you're battling with your mind is your ability to be able to bounce back, to be able to dust yourself off, to be able to get back up, to be able to go the distance. And that's really what this is about. So whenever we talk about the kinds of things that impede in our ability, what's going on in the modern world? Why are things getting worse? Well, there's a great book written recently by Jonathan Haidt called the anxious generation. And one of the things that Jonathan talks about is he talks about that the reason why, for example, girls between the ages of about 15 and 30 are struggling more and more with their mental health is because, number one, the selfie culture, this notion of being obsessed with pictures of ourselves. We're extra aware of how we look. There's a lot of these inverted commas filters that we can put on our photos. And we've become a sort of a world where we're very, very conscious of how we come across and how we look in the pictures of us. And second of all, it's very easy for us from I suppose, mobile perspective, for us to be constantly online and constantly responsive to the social media world. So in other words, we're evaluating ourselves and comparing ourselves to what everyone else is experiencing as they go through their life. This is what we call the comparison culture. And the problem with the comparison culture is we look around and we see everyone else is killing it except for us. Everyone else is going on vacation or holiday except for us. Everyone else is happy in love except for us. Everyone else is living life large except for us. Everyone else is doing well in their career except for us. And the problem is we're comparing our worst self to their best self. We're comparing the shitty part of our life to the great part of their life. And then we wonder why we feel bad, because we're constantly monitoring it. And the reality is that all that does is constantly reinforce this message to ourselves: you are not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough. And how are we supposed to function in a world where the things that we get, the lessons we get, the learnings we get, all come down to this notion that you're not enough? Besides that, we also have the political polarization, the culture wars that are happening, where everyone tries to divide us in two ways. You can't listen to that person because they're on the wrong side, right? So we're, generally speaking, triggered on a number of issues to be able to go on this side or the other. And people get really irate and they go and keyboard warrior the hell out of it. So people are like, oh, I'm saying, masks. Oh, you're wearing a mask, you're wearing a muzzle during COVID, you're a disgrace. Or, oh, you're not wearing a mask, you're murdering people, you evil demon. It's almost like masks, even wearing a mask through COVID was something that people could get angry about. They could polarize themselves around. Vaccines, polarize yourself about. All sorts of policies, polarize yourself about. Whatever one person says, if they're on the wrong side, well, we hate them. And this is a big problem because it's made us see an us versus them mentality. It's tribalized us. And it's made it to the point that, okay, because we have the need for a community, we seek community with these people that are on the same side as us, but it strips us of independent thinking and it promotes groupthink. And all of a sudden we start to buy into and believe all this bullshit just because our group does as well. And the fact is, both sides are wrong about a lot of things. And just because a person has some brilliant insights about one area doesn't mean that they're smart about other areas. They can be a complete idiot about other areas. But the problem is we're generalizing all this too much. And as a result of that, we're making another mistake. And what we need to recognize is that living in a world where we're constantly forced to take sides, and there's always two sides to everything, means that we're being manipulated over and over again. And people will say the mainstream media. Well, yeah, there is such a thing as the mainstream media. But also, just because you don't trust the mainstream media shouldn't mean you trust this crazy conspiracy theorist just because they're not part of the mainstream media. It's not a choice you have to make. You don't have to say, oh, because Uncle Bob says A and he's against the mainstream media, I need to trust Uncle Bob. You don't need to trust either of them. You need to not do your own research, because that's something that people say whenever they're the one type of person that's not going to do their own research. But you have to begin to look at things through multiple channels and try to figure out what's actually going on and realize most of the time, it probably is in the gray. Most of the time, the truth is not this or that. It's somewhere in the middle. And as soon as we fall for these extreme ideologies, or as soon as we fall for these extreme beliefs, we then become more angry with the world. And that then dictates our mental health as well. Because then we feel there's something wrong with us. Or we start to find ourselves part of a war against the other side. And we think to ourselves, well, if I fight against that other side, everything's going to be okay. We're also dealing with uncertainty. We're dealing with constant change. And we're trying to adapt in a new world. All of a sudden, we now know that AI comes along, and now our jobs are different. And now we're thinking to ourselves, am I going to be replaced by AI? So there's the uncertainty of that. But there's also the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen next. And we've been traumatized collectively as a result of COVID. For months, We always watched the news and they said, well, this might go on a little bit longer. We didn't know when it was ending. So for many, many days in a row, we're constantly reminded of just how out of control we are, just how much we can't do about the situation that we can't control. And so with all of that in mind, we are now living in a world of so much uncertainty, so much volatility, so much change. And our brains are prediction machines designed to keep us alive by making good predictions. So it's like a nightmare of a prediction machine. It's like my brain's job is to make predictions, and all of a sudden I'm living in a world that makes it so hard to make predictions. And we're constantly being exposed to all the news outside of us, which are all the things we can't control, all the things that we're not going to be able to do anything about. Then we add the usual stuff, the usual suspects. There's the usual disappointments in life, the experiences of overwhelm, trying to do too many things and not having enough resources. There's the constant demands on our time, the constant stress. There's the feeling of burnout where you're just working so much because we live in a work culture where it's like you need to keep work. It's particularly bad in the States where it's expected. You need to be working, a hustle culture. You're constantly working. Oh, I'm working all the time. And then when you burn out, you're like, oh, I don't know what's wrong. I just feel demotivated. We're not taking care of ourselves because once again, we're too strong for that. And all of this explains so much of the pain that we're experiencing, explains so much of the collective trauma that we're dealing with. And again, even the term trauma, even this use of psychobabble and therapeutic language is problematic. Everything's traumatizing. My computer wouldn't turn on. I'm traumatized. Oh, my team lost. I'm traumatized. Oh, that person said a negative comment to me online. I'm traumatized. You're not traumatized. And by creating this word traumatized, what it does is it invariably positions us as being very influenced by everything around us. Something bad can trigger us and all of a sudden we're triggered and we're traumatized and all this sort of stuff. The more we use that kind of hyperbole in our language, the more we magnify the impact of the emotion. So it's not just a case of the fact that we're bullshitting and we're pretending something's traumatic. It's that as we describe it as traumatic, it makes it more emotionally impactful on us as well. Our language influences the way in which we feel. Now I know what you're thinking. Owen, for someone trying to help me, you're certainly complaining a lot. Like you're kind of like, this is just like a rant. But I'm ranting because I feel that if you're struggling at the moment, you agree with everything that I'm saying. And if you agree with everything that I'm saying, and if you hang on, then we'll start to look at, right, well, given all of these different challenges, what is it that we can do, right? What is it we can do in a world where we feel exhausted, where we're constantly, our attention is constantly swamped and grabbed, and we're constantly responsive to texts and messages and all this sort of stuff. What is it that we can do in these kinds of situations? And in order to understand what we can do, what we need to recognize is that our bodies and our brains and a lot of the things that are going on when we're struggling are all connected together. For example, we have our physiology, we have our biology, we have what's going on in our body. And whenever we aren't looking after that, whenever we're eating sugar-rich foods or whenever we're not getting any exercise or we're not getting any sleep, we're basically screwing up our body. And when you screw up your body, you screw up your chemistry. When you screw up your chemistry, part of that chemistry is your brain chemistry. And so one of the most important things you need to do if you're struggling with any of your moods or emotions like depression, anxiety, languishing even, one of the most useful things to do is you need to take care of your body. You need to start to take care of your nutrition. You need to be eating healthy. You need to be exercising regularly. You need to be sleeping well. If you do those three things, that plays a huge part in determining how well you'll be able to deal with it. It's what is called your body budget. Is really the part of your brain that kind of regulates what's going on in your body. And if you have a surplus in that, generally, you feel good. If you have a deficit in that, generally, you feel bad. So by you eating well, by you exercising well, by you moving regularly, by you getting some sleep, by you taking rests, taking breaks, getting out into nature, hanging out with nice pets, spending time with loved ones, by you doing all that stuff, you're actually increasing and putting deposits into your body budget and making yourself feel good. That's the way to think about it. The research is clear. Take care of your body, it'll help take care of your brain. And that's where a lot of your feelings are. Next, your environment. What's your environment like? Are you living in a shitty environment? Maybe you can't do much about it yet. But maybe you can try to take care of whatever you can control in your environment. Maybe you can change, let's say you've got a computer or you've got a phone. Maybe you can change the wallpaper on your phone. Maybe you can find a place that's near you that is some form of nature or some beautiful scene that you can go to on a regular basis. Maybe you can change your environment such that you make your environment something that makes you feel a little bit better. And bit by bit, you ask yourself, how can I move myself into a place more and more where I want to be? How can I surround myself with the right kind of environment? How can I surround myself with the right kind of people, the right kind of support, the right kind of community? How can I surround myself with people that help lift me up, help support me, help challenge me to be better, right? They're supportive, but they also challenge me. They help me develop what we call a growth mindset. How can I be around those people more? And if you can't be around those people straight away, how can you do it online? Instead of going online and look at all these people getting angry or starting fights or talking about all this crap that's going on in the world and making you feel depressed and angry, how can you go to the people that inspire you, right? That take on challenges and that overcome those challenges and are sharing those kinds of things and help you to feel better? How can you do that? Because if you can start to do that, that's the step in the right direction. You're building a better environment. You're building a better community. And it's about leveraging the experiences that you have, trying to learn from the experiences of your life, trying to go, what can I learn? What lessons can I learn from the experiences that I've had in my life? How can I make my experiences count? Because we're the product of the experiences we have. We're influenced by the community and the environment we have. We're influenced by our biology. And all of those things affect the way in which we feel. And so once again, what are the emotions we're feeling? The research shows that our feelings are largely constructed. They're constructed by the guesses we make based upon what we're feeling internally, what's going on in the world, and what our memories are. And based upon those three input sources, what we remember, what we're experiencing, and what's happening in our body, we figure out what we're feeling. And so whenever you go through and you notice that you're feeling pretty shit about life, or you're feeling very anxious, or you're feeling very worried, or you feel like you're struggling, or you feel like you can't do anything, that's a feeling. That's a feeling. It's not a fact, it's a feeling. And you need to remember that this feeling is a liar. This feeling does not necessarily dictate what's true. It's just telling you it because this is what it feels. And we need to recognize this form of inner propaganda so that we can listen to it and notice it and recognize that it is just a feeling. And any sort of narrative we find ourselves talking, because often we'll talk to ourselves and this feeling will trigger the inner critic or the inner terrorizer or the inner, and there's a video that I did all about the inner voice that I did earlier on in this season. But even when this particular inner voice is triggered, it's triggered because of the emotion. And that means that a lot of the stuff that comes out of its mouth is not necessarily true. It's just informed by this feeling. It's just a story. And if there's one thing that we need to realize, that the stories that you tell yourself will determine the quality of your life. So what stories are you telling yourself? I'll never get out of this. I'll always be like this. I'm useless. I'm a loser. I'm pathetic. No one likes me. No one loves me. I'll never, ever be good enough. Once people learn who I am, they'll stop loving me. All of this bullshit we tell ourselves, because this is the story that these feelings dictate in us. And it's time that we recognize this and say enough is enough. I'm not going to be dictated to by this inner dictator that tries to tell me that these are the limits imposed on my life, that this is all I'm capable of. I'm not going to allow it to do that. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to turn to it and say, not today. Not today. Today I decide I'm going to get through this. Today I decide I'm going to move forward. Today I decide that I'm going to build the kind of life that I want. And it's not going to be easy. I'm going to face lots of adversity and lots of challenge and lots of pain. And I'm going to find myself getting knocked down, but I'm going to dust myself off, climb back up and keep moving forward, and nothing will stop me. And when we have this belief, we have this conviction, that's what allows us to succeed. We start to tell ourselves a story where we're the hero of our story. And it doesn't mean we don't face adversity. We face it. We face it a lot. But when we face it, it helps us to become stronger and better. We grow. We relish the challenge. That's what this is about. And therefore, the actions that we take, the decisions that we make, are all towards what can we do to keep moving forward. Because I tell you, the emotion, it's seductive in its approach. It tries to get us in. It tries to draw us in. It tries to make us feel a certain way. And it's critical that we decide that we are not going to allow this to happen. We need to focus on what we can control, what we can influence. This is what we call the agency math, as I call it. To focus on all the things that are in your control and, okay, what can I do? What can I influence, or who can I influence? And then what do I have to accept? And sometimes in life, you just have to accept it. Sometimes life is not fair. Sometimes things are just horrible, right? Sometimes life is just full of suffering and there's nothing you can do. And you just got to accept it. You just got to deal with it. But when you realize that, when you come to terms with that, and when you decide to focus on what you can control, one of the things you can control is the story you tell yourself about where you are, about who you are. And once you realize that the person that you are is up to you, you can become the kind of person that everyone sees you as, or you can decide to define your character, to look into your soul and decide that you can become stronger than you've ever been, that you can be ready for whatever adversity you face, that come what may, you can deal with it, that you can handle it. And when you look at your life now and you think about all the shitty things in your life, you ask yourself the question, what do I have to accept? What can I influence? And what can I control? And when you look through each and everything that you're pissed off with in life, and you start to think through and answer that question, that's what allows you to start to see a bit more of the light coming through. Look, I've had a relatively easy life compared to a lot of people. I struggle with my mind as much as anyone. I felt very dark times to the point that I wanted to end my life. And every now and then I feel the demon of depression trying to muscle its way in. But I battle it and I beat it. And some people are out there saying, well, I don't think the metaphor is quite useful. I think you should really just accept and be loving towards yourself and loving. And I get that. And if that works for you, wonderful. If you find mindfulness and just quietening your mind is your tool, great. I would not disparage anyone from using great techniques like that. But that doesn't work for everybody. And while I recommend definitely learn to meditate, it'll be so helpful for you. Practice mindfulness, learn about all of these different things, learn about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, learn about cognitive behavioral therapy. All of those are really helpful and useful. They're all tools. Learn about moving your body physically, being able to transform your mood by moving yourself physically, by art, by dance. There's so many different ways that we can change our lives, that we can change our mind. But as you listen to me here, whatever you're going through, I want you to realize that everything can get better. No matter what you're dealing with, everything can get better. And I want you to, with every fiber of your mind, every fiber of your soul, imagine everything getting better. Not so that you can hope for it, but so you can see a vision to move towards. So you can imagine things getting better. So you can desire things to get better. And then you can say to yourself, step by step, how do I get there? And recognize things will start to get in your way. Your own beliefs, your own doubt might get in your way. The inner critic might try to get in your way. Other people might get in your way. There might be other priorities that get in your way. Your circumstances might try to trip you up and get in your way. But if you're ready for it, and if you're saying to yourself, no matter what, I'm going to make this happen, then come what may, you'll be able to do it. Sometimes we evaluate our life. How am I doing in life? And at the end of the day, none of it matters. None of it matters. As you get older, one of the things that you realize is that so much of the shit that you gave a shit about when you were younger, it really doesn't matter. And a lot of the things that you had a very strong opinion with, now all of a sudden you realize, well, there's multiple ways of interpreting that same thing. You start to cut yourself a break and you cut other people a break as well. And you also realize that people are not nearly as smart as you once thought they were. And life is full of stupidity. And sometimes life is full of people who are selfish. But in a world which is as imperfect as this one, in a world which is as tough as this one, in a world which is as full of suffering and struggling as this one, the only thing that we can rely on is the fact that we get to choose what we do with our mind. We get to choose what we do with our decisions. We get to choose what we do with our brains, with our actions. So I tell you now, whatever you're dealing with, reach down into the fire in the very center of your soul and believe that you can get through this. I know you can. All I want you to do is entertain the belief. Because once you imagine where you want to get to, and then you say, what do I need to do? What do I need to learn? What challenges are in my way? What resources do I need? What support do I need? Relish the challenges as they come along. Recognize that the harder the challenge, the stronger you become. And as you do that, you can get through anything. And it won't mean that depression will magically stop happening. You won't immediately stop feeling depressed necessarily all the time, but you will be feeling better than you do today. And that's all you can hope for, that you keep feeling better every single day. And then you stay vigilant And then you build a healthier mind and a healthier heart to the point where things that used to get you no longer do. When we start to change the way we think and change the way we deal with the world, it changes our experience of the world. And it really starts by telling yourself a new story. So what's the story that you're going to tell yourself? And how are you going to have, if not a happy ever after, a better than it was yesterday? If you can tell yourself a story that gives you that, that's the start you're looking for. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this helpful. I know what you're saying. Jeez, Owen was very serious there. He gets very intense, doesn't he? I haven't seen that side of Owen. It's a bit scary, really. Yeah. So there you go. Don't worry, next week we'll be back with a more chilled out version, right? A more normal version. It'll be okay. You'll see the normal me there. But sometimes difficult times call for important conversation. So I hope this was useful for you. Let me know in the comments and let me know by email and that kind of thing. For now, take care, be well. May the force be with you and may you continue to get through it. You can get through it. Things can get better. For you, I sincerely hope that they do.